wounds, woundology, the science of wounds, the birth wound, the earth wound. These are important things for us to be aware of. Why? Well, the main reason is that we need to study our wounds so they don't shape our practice. We need to become aware of our wounds so they are not what's guiding and leading us in our practice. So, how is the wound created and why do we need to identify it? Oftentimes, wounds are created by a couple of different things. Fear can create a wound, trauma can create a wound, and ideologies can also be very wounding. So we have this concept that ideas liberate, but ideas dominate and suffocate. Okay? We're going to get a little bit deeper with this woundology and the birth wound, so that we can really understand and learn how to excavate and heal, instead of doing something called spinning the wound, indulging in a wound. And you're probably saying, why would anyone want to do that? Why wouldn't somebody want healing? Well, there's a number of reasons that people can become addicted to their stories. Just sit and think with that for a second. Why we might want to cling on to how we've been wronged. So we have a wound. Oftentimes that wound stems from a fear. We can study our fears then, right? So we can become the masters of our fears. So that's not what's dominating and motivating us. Wound can be caused by trauma, and these things do happen. And a wound can be caused by holding an ideology instead of an idea. How do you know it's morphed from an idea into an ideology? Well, usually you can't be convinced that there's any other way of viewing or thinking about whatever the topic is at hand. So that's kind of when we can identify that we've shifted from the realm of idea to, or the realm of possibility, into something that's become an ideology. Idealistic thinking is oftentimes very legalistic thinking. It's black or white. There's no gray area. There's no room for any other possibility. It's an ideology. Okay, so we have a wound, and right now we're going to be talking about the earth wound or the birth wound. Doop. Okay, so we have those two wounds. Now, why it's important to look at these two things, they're both very interconnected, and a lot of them have to do with the story that we tell, the story about the earth, the story about birth. The earth is polluted, the earth isn't thriving, the earth needs help, the earth needs to be saved, right? We hear this narrative all the time. And then when we look at birth, we hear the narrative of birth isn't safe, birth needs to have X, Y, and Z in place in order for it to be safe, and it's very rigid, black and white ideals relating to both the earth and to birth. So this is a story that we tell, and the wound story, repeated over and over again, it disempowers. okay? It disempowers and it keeps the wound open when we just keep spinning it. So spinning the wound equals disempowerment and keeping that wound open, okay? Alternatively, we can take the story and we can choose instead evolution and healing. And that is a much different way for us to excavate a wound. It's changing the story, changing the narrative, right? So when we're changing the story, we're changing the narrative, we're changing the way that we're viewing the wound, it's no longer necessarily a bad thing, you know? It's no longer like we're a victim. We can shift out of this victim mentality into our power for healing. So we can focus on, instead of focusing on the wound, we can focus on the remedy. What is the good that can come out of this? Yes, it is possible that good can come from our wounds. That is a choice that we make. That is the choice that we make to heal and heal ourselves. So we can, there's a couple different ways that we can approach our healing. And oftentimes a lot of these things kind of go hand in hand. But in the story of the earth wound and the birth wound, probably the first thing we need to do is to find the root or the source conflict. So instead of continually focusing on the presenting problem, we can focus on the source of the problem, the source of the conflict. And there's actually not that many choices to choose from here when we're doing this type of excavation. There usually is a root. A wound is rooted in fear. It's rooted in a low self-esteem, low confidence, abandonment concerns, rejection, fear of failure, or an inability to trust. So we can kind of look at those source conflicts and pin one or two down and say, okay, this is where this is coming from. This is what is preventing healing. And this is why it's so important to get intimate with our wounds. So we can, when I talk about getting intimate, what I'm talking about is we can develop an awareness, right? This is the kind of information that we get in that theta state. These are the downloads that we get, the information that we get, the aha moments of this is the source conflict. This is why this is going on. And now I'm going to choose to empower myself and I'm going to change the story and I'm going to use this for my greater good, for the greater good of humanity. I'm leaving it behind, okay? So that would be empowerment. And that would be transformation. It would also be using our wounds for evolution. You know, changing that story about, instead of this has been done to me, this is wrong, this is the problem, then we can switch it around and say, how is this working for my greater good? So another way that we can remedy the wound is to be heard or be witnessed. Now, being heard does not mean that we're telling the same story over and over and over again, right? It means that we are bravely and vulnerably sharing our story, sharing what's happened with somebody, and then we're being witnessed and seen, right? So somebody else knows that this is the thing that happened. You're not carrying it alone anymore. Someone has seen that this is something that you've been through. And in that, being seen and heard, you're then free to release it and stop carrying it. And that is a conscious choice. And that is evolution. And that's why it's so important going into this, into the realm of birth work, that we kind of focus on woundology and the birth wound and the problems that can be invited in when the wound is our operating system instead of operating in a way that is empowered and aware and evolutionary.